Welcome to this edition of Sideways, in which I'm going to be asking the question, what would Jesus eat? So for this, I'm in my kitchen. It means we may be interrupted at some point. Better put on my apron. Hopefully you'll still be able to hear me okay. I thought I'd make some bread whilst we talk about this. What would Jesus eat? I thought about this the other day. I went on a training day for new curates, and there were about 30 people there, and only 3 of us were vegetarian, which surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't surprise me, 10%. But I know it's one of those issues, well, some people haven't thought about, others do, and have quite strong opinions, and it's certainly not my intention today to make you feel that your choices are in any way inappropriate or wrong. But I am hoping perhaps to get you thinking, maybe individually or as a small group or as members of a congregation about what you eat and whether they are the kinds of things that you imagine Jesus would be eating if he was alive today. It might be helpful to start with what did Jesus used to eat when he was alive? Well, there's some uncertainty, obviously, but we know Jesus ate bread. That's why bread's kind of the definite one. We can certainly say bread. It was probably whole grain, probably not particularly refined. Lots of grit in it. When they look at teeth from people in that area, they often discover that their teeth are quite ground down from biting on all the bits of grit that were in amongst the flour. I'm quite lucky. I've got obviously my new bag of flour here from the supermarket, which is very refined. Fish, people would normally say fish as well, although interestingly, not that interestingly I don't think, but both the explicit mentions of times when it's mentioned Jesus ate fish are both post-resurrection, so I did read some arguments that these were symbolic representations of Jesus and fish because of the ichthus, Jesus symbol amongst early Christians. Olives, olive oil, we can assume. We can assume figs as well. A lot of what we know about Jesus and what he would have eaten is actually from the Mishnah, kind of Jewish reflections on the law that was written in the 3rd and 4th century, and were using source material from the time of Jesus. So that's where we get a lot of kind of what did people tend to eat in the time of Jesus. So bread, flour, probably eggs. Eggs are mentioned a lot in the recipes. Hen eggs and, which I haven't started that now, hen eggs and other bird types of the area. Just looking at my list. Lamb, of course. Lamb was used in the Passover meal, although interestingly it's not mentioned in the Passover that Jesus has as part of the Last Supper. So meat would have been eaten pretty sparingly. It was really just for Passover or for very special occasions. In fact, in the Mishnah it's mentioned that if you find meat lying around on the ground, it is something you are permitted to pick up and use. So it's obviously a very high value in that even if you find it just lying around and it's possibly gone off, you're still allowed to use it, which kind of demonstrates the value that it had. It wouldn't have been something that the normal person would have had very often as part of their diet. Now all of this is kind of interesting, I hope, but it doesn't necessarily tell us what we should be eating today, in the same way that we don't speak the same language as Jesus and we don't dress the same and we cut our hair differently, etc., etc. Nor are we expected to literally follow Christ in eating what he ate. And it seems fairly clear from the Bible that he was quite probably pescatarian with the odd meat days thrown in. So why then would somebody like myself choose to be vegetarian as a Christian in 2022? So it's really, I suppose, as with many of these issues about what would Jesus do, or how should a Christian follow Christ today, we're trying to get to the values. And of course, we're guided by what we know about the life of Christ, and we're guided by various passages from the Bible, which often can be interpreted in both for and against any particular argument. So I'm not going to necessarily seek to do that, although I'd be happy if there are any comments or observations you'd like to make about this presentation. Do get in touch. It's more about what kind of principles underlie. There was certainly a freedom in what Jesus spoke about in terms of getting rid of the law and not judging people for what they eat. So there's an element of flexibility and freedom and non-judgmentalism about what we should eat. So I don't agree with people necessarily who sort of say you must do this or you must eat that. Also what we find though is mercy. And I think as increasingly as we've increased our understanding of the sentience of other living beings, pigs and cows, sheep, other mammals in particular, we're aware of their suffering. And I suppose then some of the compassion and the care for God's creation, for me, extends to not eating them. We also have introduced a way of farming, industrialised, intensive farming in the last 150, 200 years that would have been unknown, or certainly perhaps less common and unknown on the scale that we have it today in the time of Jesus. And there are issues, I think, around the way that we treat animals and some of those more intensive farming practices that again encourages me to not eat animals. So intensive farming, out of a care and a compassion for God's creation, and a mercy and a love towards all that God has created. I think also it feels in 2022 like quite low-hanging fruit, quite an easy win in terms of climate change to give up on eating meat. It is well documented, the impact that the rearing of intensively farmed meats, in particular beef, has on the climate. And so to not eat those products seems like a loving thing to do towards my neighbour who is already being affected by the negative impacts of climate change. So I've chosen not to eat meat. I haven't eaten meat for about 12 years now. And I have no problems with the argument that Jesus did occasionally eat meat, and certainly I'm pretty confident that he ate quite a lot of fish. But I wonder what it all means for you. And I wonder, what would you eat? What do you feel is the right thing for you at this time in your life and in this stage of your faith journey? So thank you to listening to me on Sideways. My dough's not bad. I think it's going to make quite a nice loaf. I just need to put the stove on and make that into a nice loaf of bread. Thanks for listening.